Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. Analytics topics covered conversationally and sometimes with explicit language. Here are your hosts, Mo, Michael, and Tim.
Hi, everyone. This is the Analytics Power Hour, and this is episode 190. You know, we like to think of ourselves as fairly modern, and this is a modern analytics podcast. Hey, Mo, how's the modernity?
The modernity is great.
As opposed to the maternity, which is, you know, a different thing altogether.
Totally different thing.
Yes. Tim, even as quintessential as you are, you still stay pretty up to date on things. How are you doing?
Definitely not modern.
Yeah, and I'm Michael, and I even own an NFT, so, I'm doing all right. Well,
you really are proud of that.
I've owned a number of them in theory, I guess. Okay, let's not talk about that anymore. We'll do a whole podcast episode about how I waste money on stupid stuff. All right. Last year we renamed the podcast, and actually it was just so we could talk about topics like this one. The modern data stack is upon us, and unsurprisingly, not everyone's problems have been completely solved with a cloud-based data warehouse, an ETL tool, and a reporting platform. It turns out what a lot of business users have wanted all along is consistent definitions and usage of metrics across the entire business. To which we said, well, why didn't you say so? But we thought we should add a guest, someone who could give us maybe some more insight into the ever-changing hydra that is the modern data stack. Benn Stancil is the Chief Analytics Officer and founder of Mode, an analytics platform designed to help data analysts and data scientists analyze, visualize, and share data. He has also held analytics roles throughout his career at Microsoft and Yammer. He has an excellent newsletter you can subscribe to at benn.substack.com. That's benn.substack.com. And today he is our guest. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Howdy. Great to be here.
So, Ben, maybe to kick us off and to get the conversation going, how did you find yourself as an advocate or a voice in the modern data stack problems? Because, that's what brought you to our doorstep and why we're talking today. But we've all really enjoyed reading some of your writings, over the years. And so it'd be good to hear a little of your background, maybe.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we started Mode, me and a couple other folks started Mode now about 8 years ago. So we worked at Microsoft, Yammer before that. Yammer was acquired by Microsoft, then Microsoft, and then ended up building some internal tools at Microsoft that we thought, hey, these might be good products to build for the rest of the world. And that's kind of where Mode came from. My story in that was me and the two other people who started it. One of them was our CEO. He is good talking to other people. He is presentable. He is nice. People enjoy hanging out with him. So he was the CEO who was out talking to potential customers and investors and things like that. Our second co-founder was an engineer who he was responsible for being locked in a room to build the product. And my background is as an analyst. And if you're an analyst at a 3-person company with no data, you don't have a whole lot to do. And so I basically started writing stuff on a blog. At that point, this was a while ago, it wasn't about the modern data stack, which wasn't even a term at that point. It was more about pop culture things that were related to data. So the very first blog post on Mode's blog, and it's actually still up if you go to our blog, it's a post about Miley Cyrus and the VMAs. And it's basically like a data-driven look at the VMAs and YouTube views of various videos. And Miley Cyrus's video had terrible reviews on YouTube, and it was kind of like, what's going on here? I don't remember the answer to that question. But basically my view of that was hey, one of the things we can do is we can engage with the community in different ways. And if I'm not building a product or out, doing sort of sales and things like that, that was something that I enjoyed and worked actually reasonably well for us, kind of unintentionally. We weren't really necessarily had a whole lot of a plan around it. It was just kind of all right, this will be a thing that we'll see how we kind of build some audience with this. Over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, as someone who's working in a startup, you find yourself in a bunch of different roles. You end up filling a bunch of different sort of holes and things like that, bouncing around from different departments. And so that was basically my course of things. As Mode has grown and as the company's got bigger and it's matured, we've brought on more and more people who know what they're doing. And so I basically slowly rotated my way through the company until getting replaced by people who are experts in the things that I was attempting to do. At which point, sometime about a year ago, I kind of found myself back where I started, This time, basically, okay, go write some stuff on the internet, but instead of it being about kind of data and pop culture, at this point I had a lot longer of just like time thinking about the industry, the space, tooling, things like that, the problems that we encounter, the problems we knew our customers encountered. And so that's where the Substack came from. And it's a little bit of a Substack without a clear thesis. It's more of talking about what's in the space, what's happening in the space, where things are going, things like that. But a lot of it's just centered around, hey, what's going on exactly as you described in your open of like, modern data stack is a difficult thing to characterize exactly. It's an evolving thing where people who have the privilege of being able to see a lot of that just from being vendors in the space, talking to a lot of teams. And so it's basically my thoughts on that, which sometimes come out okay and sometimes come out less okay. And so that's kind of where it came from.
Well, in the modern data stack, I mean, it's just DBT, reverse ETL, and the metrics layer. I feel like those are like those are three different things. I don't know. Like when it comes to something like the modern data stack, I think that feels like something that people are comfortable, that people are trying to work through what that is and aren't necessarily trying to declare this is what it is. Or is it one that you feel like people are declaring? And I guess I'll ask, within that, the metrics layer, is that something that people are agreed on kind of what it is and are now all trying to come at ways to solve for it and explain it? Or is it one of those terms that is now starting to spread out and people either assume, like an analytics engineer, people assume they know what it means and therefore start like diluting the meaning of it?
Mm-hmm. So I think on the definition of a modern data stack, I think that is pretty diluted, and that you have all these different people can have different definitions of it. Some people are like, oh, it's the unbundling of stuff. Some people say it's the same BI tools in the cloud. It's decentralized. It's I think Martin Casado is a partner at Andreessen. It's the delamination of the warehouse. There's a bunch of these different sort of ways of putting it. My version of this, which is sort of tongue in cheek, but I actually kind of stand by it, is it's analytics tools that were launched on Product Hunt.
I can see that
because it's basically things that like came up in that era and that were aimed at that audience. Because it's like, is the Oracle Cloud Data Warehouse part of the modern data stack? It's like, I would kind of say no. Like, yeah, it wants to be,
yes,
but it's not really. And like, I don't think most of the people in the community would say it is, but kind of who cares? Like, and I think to your question of like, is it the modern data stack to me is like anybody can start a company and say, yes, this is a part of the modern data stack. I don't think there's any, oh no, you have to join the club. You have to have so many users, otherwise you're not a part of it. I think it's just kind of like that philosophy of tools.
Well, yeah, the key is you have to start a company, because if you're an existing company, then you can't Microsoft can't just say that Azure is part of it now. Like that's not, I mean it is, but
yeah. And
I get what you're saying.
So I think that part's a little bit like fuzzy. On the metrics piece, I think it's still new. It feels pretty well defined as to what it is supposed to. The high level goals feel pretty well defined. We understand kind of the scope of the problem. We understand roughly where we want to go to fix it. I think there are now a lot of new ideas emerging about how to exactly solve it. The folks at DBT have a particular flavor of it. Transform has a particular flavor of it. Looker is sort of becoming one with the way that they're like sort of seeming to strip LookML out of the product and put Tableau on top. There's like Malloy, which is the Looker spinoff thing by the founder of Looker. That's kind of a metrics Larry thing. There's a bunch of versions of this now that are kind of in that flavor. But I think the concept of just like standardization of metrics that isn't traditional BI and how it does it is a fairly like the walls around it are fairly well defined. I think like the walls around observability are not well defined. Nobody knows where observability really ends because people have defined it in a bunch of different ways. I think the metrics layer, it's like pretty clear where that starts and stops. What you do in the middle and how it all works, I think, is still a lot to be figured out.
Can we just take a step back though and start with the problem? Because a lot of the concepts that you're talking about and the technologies are things that we do use at Canva. In fact, your blog was like an actual description of like exactly how we're working at Canva. It was really funny to read. But I'm not sure maybe everyone follows like what the metrics layer is trying to solve for, right? Because there is a problem there that all these companies are trying to tackle.
I feel like a lot of people hear will hear a surface level description and say, I know how to solve that. And that really means they don't really understand the problem that's trying to be solved. So yeah, I'd love to, if you say it's a pretty well-defined problem, I would love to hear that articulation.
Yeah. So my definition of it is the way we used to do this was kind of a two-step process. You'd have a bunch of data in a warehouse that was all raw or what, it was just like you dump data in a warehouse. And then BI tools did everything. And so you would define relationships between that data and BI tools, and then you would define metrics on top of those relationships. So you would have a giant list of like raw customers, say, or like purchases. Say you'd have a list of purchases. The BI tool would define relationships between purchases and customers and like line items in those orders that would create these data models to say how you join stuff together. And then on top of that, you'd have formulas basically that would say, here's how we compute revenue from a giant list of orders. Whereas like, do you include orders from gift cards? Do you include orders that get returned? Do you include sales tax or not sales? Like, how do you make those adjustments? Those are all decisions you have to make when you're actually defining this metric. And so the BI tool would be the place where the logic of the joining and the logic of the metric would live. And then people would have little drag and drop tools to be able to say, like, show me this metric by this dimension, and they'd build stuff. And like underneath the surface, it's all just like a big data cube. DBT basically pulled the first part out of that out. So DBT said, okay, what if instead of defining those relationships in a BI tool, we define them in a way where they just get derived into tables in your warehouse? So we now have like a nice clean dimension purchases table, and we have dimension customers, and like hopefully those join keys become relatively straightforward. But you clean up a lot of like the sort of like modeling logic now in DBT before you actually get to any kind of consumption tool. And then those consumption tools that just sit on top of the warehouse like automatically integrate with DBT. It's not really an integration, but like the output of what DBT creates is tables that is just readable by anything. So, and this was one of the sort of subtle brilliance of DBT was they could slide under any tool and automatically the values of the things that they created would integrate with everything else without them having to actually build that integration. So then you end up with like, okay, we have these nice clean tables, but how do we actually turn this purchases table into a metric about revenue? There's still logic that has to go into that. And ideally, like we have a dashboard over here and some analyst does some analysis over here. We're using the same logic for that. We don't have a solution for that. The way that we'd have to do that now is you'd have a BI tool like Looker or something where that computation would get put in, or in Tableau, it would be computed in like a calculated field or whatever. And so you'd have your nice dashboard. But then if an analyst wants to come along and write a SQL query where it's like, oh, our revenue went down, what happened? The first step might be to start recreating that in some other tool to be able to do like richer analysis by writing code against it. You've got to recreate that metric, and that metric logic doesn't live in a place that's accessible. The metric logic lives in a place that is like now just accessible to the BI tool. And so the idea with the metrics layer is essentially, what if we put the metrics logic further upstream from consumption such that all of these tools that use it, whether or not they are analytics tools or BI tools, but also you could do it with reverse ETL, you could do it with like operational tools, you could do it with ML platforms, whatever. Those things have access to the same kind of core governance logic that defines the metric in the same way that they have access to the core governance logic that defines the tables through something like DBT. And so that to me is like why it's a fairly clean, to me, metrics layers do not derive tables. They don't do fundamental business logic modeling of those tables, nor are they about consuming data. They're mostly just a framework for saying, hey, we have a bunch of inputs that are tables. What is the formula that we want to compute on top of those tables that will spit out a consistent metric? And then, what's the API essentially for being able to access that? Is it an interface? Is it like actual code? Is it SQL? Is it some other API that's like, some REST API? That's where all I think the implementation details get decided. There's also a lot of stuff about like, does Transform do it differently than DBT? Yes, they do it very differently. How does it actually work? But fundamentally, I want to be able to request a metric to say, like, show me daily active users by day, by region, by quarter, whatever. And that to be reliable regardless of which tool I actually make that request from.
Yeah, and I mean, I really liked the point you made in the article about the alternative is that you end up basically, like you have your, I guess, modeled data, right? And then you end up with report tables that are trying to cut by different segments. And then you end up with like hundreds of report tables because someone wants to look at it by country, someone wants to look at it by customer segment. Someone wants to look at it by like length of customer duration or whatever it is. And so you could potentially otherwise end up with a gazillion different report tables all trying to aggregate that data for some kind of data visualization tool.
Mm-hmm. And Looker got this right. Like Looker was the first one. I mean, Looker is architecturally the same as what BI has been forever, but they got the idea right of, okay, we build this, what essentially is a metrics layer that then allows people to do all these like derived aggregations and stuff so that you're not creating a giant cube that is a million dimensions wide. It like sort of is this synthetic cube that the whole thing happens on the fly, which with a cloud warehouse that's fast, you can now do. But the problem with Looker was it was like obviously a very valuable company that had a good outcome and makes a whole bunch of money, so it wasn't really a problem. But the thing that like, I think architecturally Looker was going to run into problems 3 or 4 years from now, and they kind of already are seeing that because it is a metrics layer designed just for the Looker BI tool.
Yes, totally.
And at some point, I think like they want that to be more open, and obviously with the Tableau integration, which I think you could probably argue was done for a few different reasons, but one of those reasons might be a recognition that actually LookML is more valuable as a kind of a generally accessible thing, as opposed to just a backend to a single BI tool.
All right, let's step aside for a brief word about our sponsor, ObservePoint, the industry leader when it comes to governing the completeness and the integrity of the tagging on your site. I know this isn't the sponsor spot where we do a quiz normally, but I decided to make this one a bit of a test just for fun. So Mo, you're up. Fill in the blank. ObservePoint can be used to automatically blank your data collection for errors across your entire website.
Audit!
Correct. Okay, Tim, now it's your turn. Fill in these blanks. ObservePoint can be used to blank your blank, 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 and blank, blank for blank, and blank, blank, blank.
This doesn't seem fair, but I'll give it a go.
All right.
ObservePoint can be used to test your most important pages and user paths for functionality and accurate data collection.
Oh, I am so sorry. Well, Tim, your statement about ObservePoint is correct. The answer was only supposed to be the blanks. Oh. So the correct answer was test most important pages, user paths, functionality, accurate data collection. So Mo is the winner.
Woohoo!
Jeez, give me a break.
Well, better luck next time, Tim. Maybe study a little harder.
I did study. I actually read ObservePoint's 2022 Digital Governance Report, which was a survey of 230 marketing, analytics, and privacy professionals, and I was all set to go with tidbits from that report about how companies are thinking about things like moving server-side for marketing and analytics tech, grappling with privacy challenges, and maintaining effective data governance.
Oh, wow. I mean, that sounds pretty interesting. Too bad that wasn't part of the quiz. But if you, dear listener, wanted to check out that report and or learn about ObservePoint's many governance capabilities, head over to observepoint.com/analytics power hour and do that. All right. Let's get back to the show.
So something that I've seen in a digital analytics and BI context, Crater time and time again, pick your digital analytic tool, be it Adobe, be it Google, pick your BI platform, be it Tableau, be it Domo, you name it. And I'm struggling to figure out if the metrics layer helps with this or if just faster processing, but I've watched BI teams say, we're going to bring in the digital analytics data. I can go back 15 years with Cognos saying, sure, we can handle your web trends data. It's just data. And like the core thing that BI like developers can never grasp, and I'm curious as to whether a metrics layer helps with this or not, is that whole deduping, metrics that need to be deduped, which I know we use daily active users is similar to this, but it's like, oh, we're going to bring in a flat table. We're going to put, 10 different, we're going to pull this out of our BI tool by day, by channel, by device category, by whatever, and we're going to bring in visits, page views, visitors, conversions, orders, whatever. And so it winds up coming into the BI tool with dimensions and metrics that some of them aggregate and aggregate fine, because you can, revenue, it's all going to add up. But something like visits or visitors, it starts cratering because they say, oh, well, now when I roll up and try to look at total visitors, my number is huge because they're spread across multiple dimensions. And like the one trying to explain that to the BI tool owners who seem to be conditioned to working with like data that's not an issue. And the only solution I can think through is, well, you have to be able to query that raw data on the fly. If I have a metrics layer, I could do that, but now am I not like relying on every time I do something, I'm having to do a massive query to go through and do all the processing to get to that?
Yeah. So this is a real question, I think. And it's something that it's still, to me, an open issue. So one, I very much agree with you that like, there's a couple things actually tied into that. One, there's a question of like the sort of metrics bloat of just like, we have tons of metrics. We thought we organized them and everybody has the right things. Now we have 1,000. What do we do? I think there are some technological solutions to that. There's a handful of companies out there that are doing these kinds of metrics layer things. They all have their slightly different variant of how they differentiate themselves. I know of one, for instance, that is focusing on exactly that issue. That is focusing on, how do we help if you create one metric and somebody else creates another metric that looks very similar? Can we like try to say, hey, these are the same? Don't do that. That people have built like ML platforms basically that try to do this and try to say, hey, these two things look pretty similar. Can we make that a different, a smaller problem? I think the real solution to that is probably just discipline. It's discipline by the teams that you have to figure out ways to keep people from doing that. Somewhat like I think DBT also sort of figured some of this stuff out. I don't think this was a DBT specific solution, but they figured out how to prevent some of the bloat around tables by actually just putting in a bunch of friction to create them. So there used to be, Facebook, for instance, used to have a way that was a sort of an internal like DBT type thing where anybody could write a query and say like materialize this as a table. I mean, effectively it's DBT without some of the fancy DAG stuff, but it was essentially like I could just create a job to say build a table out of SQL. It was a disaster in the sense that people created thousands of them and nobody knew what was good. And I mean, it was a disaster in the sense that Facebook's worth $1 trillion, but it was also a disaster in that like it was really, really hard to manage and nobody knew what to trust. And so everyone just had their little like walled gardens.
And if somebody spun up a table, then other people could see that table? I mean, so it's like, okay, so you were just okay.
Yeah, so you'd like be like, oh, this looks interesting. This is useful. I'll try this. It's like no idea where it comes from. And DBT sort of solves some of that by putting friction in the way. And they would probably argue that part of that is like good practices, peer review, that sort of stuff. Honestly, I think the bigger thing is it's just like gets kind of hard. A lot of people don't want to learn it, and not that many people are going to. And so you automatically constrain how much stuff you can create.
Oh, I'm like, I work at a company with like 110 analysts, and it terrifies me how much stuff can be created because every single person on the team is expected to be able to use Git. So,
and that's, yeah, and there are certainly ways that it probably breaks down.
But I think that's where the good practices come in, right? Like you have peer review, and like our data warehouse team have been ruthless, where you can create like a temporary table and stuff, but they delete them very, very, very regularly, intentionally to stop people doing that. It's like you have to go through the proper process of getting peer reviews and actually pushing your code to our data warehouse, and if you build temporary stuff, we're going to delete it so that you can't build things off the back of it.
Yeah, and we like that's something we've done at Node, but haven't been as rigorous about. Where it's like we have scratch spaces, most of your stuff ends up there, and we drop the scratch spaces every Sunday, and like that's what you get. And so I think there is some stuff like that. To your point about metrics though, and like this recomputation every time. Yeah, this is the I can't remember the exact term, the symmetric aggregate problem that like Looker solved. Basically, like you can't say you're trying to do something that you can't just sum numbers together, like daily active users, you can sum into monthly active users by just summing daily by month. But like monthly distinct users, you can't do that. You could sum the total users that are like logging on every day and say this is the total number of logins, but you can't sum distinct users because if someone used it 30 days, you'd 30 times count them or whatever.
So Looker actually has those sort of constraints that you can build in to the...
Correct. This is one of like the technological innovations of Looker is basically, you can define these metrics and they will do these things in such a way that you can create fan out joins that it will then figure out where to collapse those down such that you can count monthly active users on top of daily active users without just summing everyday user. Like it will do the distincts. To your point, though, the way that it does that is it pushes computation down to the warehouse. It can't pre-aggregate everything up into like a giant table and just like it's not really just a cube. It's having to actually push that computation back down to the warehouse. I don't know how we solve this. And one way we solve it is we all spend a whole bunch of money on Snowflake, which is kind of what it seems like we're doing.
Welcome to our life.
And so that is one option. I'm sure Snowflake loves it, but it's not really a scalable thing. I think there's probably some ways that we can get around, like people will figure out some smart things to do. Transform does a little bit of this. A Transform is built on top of this, like inspired by tech that came out of Airbnb, where they did this kind of thing where they essentially would pre-aggregate a bunch of stuff once, and then once they had it, they essentially put it in like a in-memory store that would let you kind of fetch those metrics in a way that was a little bit faster, so you didn't have to run queries every time. But I don't really, this is like getting out of my depth. I don't really know how this problem gets solved. I think it's like hit the performance problem first.
Well, although it seems like you did sort of, part of it does come down to having some discipline around metrics. Like it's, cause I'd read something where it was, the author was talking about like, it was Falcon, came out of Mona Akmal, why metrics should be a first-class citizen in a modern data stack. And I was like, well, this will be interesting. And it seemed like her definition was, well, metrics are basically this really tightly defined, they're like your true business key performance indicators. And you're going to like if you're all about daily active users, then you're going to put that on a pedestal and you're going to govern the crap out of it. If you want, clicks on blue buttons, I don't know what you call that. Like that would still be, you're still counting something. So definitionally, it still seems like a metric, but I wonder if that's part of it. If you get alignment and a little focus from what are the 5 or 10 or 20 things that we, revenue, orders, active users, subscriptions, renewals, really nail down and say, manage the crap out of that. And this other stuff, let it be a little Wild West.
To be honest, that was actually one of the reasons. So like we use Mode and Looker at Canva, and we were considering using Tableau at one stage. And one of the reasons that we went with Looker is because we had all worked at companies where everyone was using calculated fields in Tableau and had created various slightly different definitions. And the idea of being able to use LookML to define the metrics and make sure they were standardized was like a problem we wanted to try and solve, like very specifically.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with the idea too, that it's like, there is a distinction between a metric and a chart. Like everything that you create is not a metric and shouldn't be. Like to me, businesses should have a handful of metrics because that's all anybody can actually understand. And that's all that anybody can really meaningfully make decisions about. If you're trying to like optimize 20 metrics, you're not optimizing anything. You've got 20 people who are all just running in different directions. And there was a smart post, I thought, from the folks at Eppo, who's like a A/B testing, modern data stack A/B testing tool, basically about how Airbnb uses metrics. They were also folks out of Airbnb, and they essentially were saying like, look, they had like one. They had this like, it was like bookings per night or something, or it was like total bookings, I think. It was essentially the volume of
total bookings.
Yeah.
Like, total nights booked.
Yeah, something like that. And so the only way that it became important because it was like everybody could talk about it. It was the thing that was in everybody's head. Every engineer was like, how does this improve nights booked? Every product manager thought about it. People on the marketing team thought about it. Whereas everybody had different metrics. You're kind of all optimizing these like small goals, but never really moving in the same direction. And so I think, you have to have some sub stuff, and like you can't run a business on one metric, but you also can't run a business on 1,000. Yeah,
which I think is, it's kind of like when you say that modern data stack, it comes out of analytics platforms coming out of Product Hunt. It does seem like it was interesting, kind of reading up, and daily active users gets kind of used as the example. And I can't remember, Mo, you've talked, I don't know if it's monthly active users or something, like some flavor of that, which there are kind of the modern, newer, younger companies, especially when they're kind of digital first sort of companies like Airbnb or Uber or Canva, but then you turn around and you're like, what about, brick and mortar or pharma or healthcare, hospital systems? CPG, like some of those, there are times where I think, yeah, they struggle a lot more because they don't have kind of this digital connection to the user and the conversion. And I sometimes worry that some of the problem solving is kind of for a subset that has user level digital data with a quick conversion. And I wonder how it maps to other ones. I feel like Mo, you and I have kind of had this debate.
I'm not sure I understand your question, because what I'm trying to get my head around is like, yes, well, I look at some of those modern companies, and I include Canva in that, as being willing to try things that maybe more traditional companies haven't gone down the path of looking at, or like might have more traditional data teams or data structures or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, I still think they're trying to solve the same problem. It's just that there's less friction to solve them because you're at a company with younger people or whatever who are more willing to try.
No. I mean,
try to explain to me, why would this metrics problem not exist at a healthcare company? Wouldn't they have the same issue?
Well, so let me take pharma with the fucked up U.S. system of where that's a big moneymaker for companies. But if you're in pharma, you're like, well, there's one metric. It's prescriptions. Like how many prescriptions, or maybe how many doses, or some flavor of that. Like that's the metric you care about. But then you actually say, well, wait a minute, what is marketing doing to drive those? Well, it's kind of a little privacy thing. You're not looking, marketers aren't saying, I'm targeting that person who went to their doctor and had this interaction and then went and did this. And then, so you don't have that traceability. Take an example of, I'm selling pet food where people are buying it at Walmart or Target or the grocery store. I'm marketing people. They all have dogs. And I mean, a lot of them, CPG or FMCG in Europe, will head down the path of saying, aha, the solution is we just need first party data. We just need to convince, well, I'm not going to sign up to have a one-to-one relationship with my fucking pet food provider. Like, who the hell cares? So
it always comes back to pet food, doesn't it, Tim? It always comes back to pet food or toothpaste.
I might have some trauma from a past.
Tim, just download the pet food app on your phone, okay? Get it over with.
But there are lots of those. If you're in financial services, sure, once somebody is a customer and you're a big financial services, sure, you have a lot of that interaction. But when I'm trying to sell to them, I
still think Ben's example fits. Like, I worked in e-commerce, and the definition of revenue is so fucking complicated because it's like, are you including items that got returned, not
wait
returned?
A minute.
How is this not the same for pet food?
You literally just did a completely shifted and said, I have the same problem in an e-commerce.
Well, I must because Helbs is like smirking. Yes.
I'm laughing.
But I was saying, I think there are places where that's having that finite set of metrics is hard to have the finite set, and you turned it around to a pure play e-commerce company. Still falls in the world of pure play e-commerce. What about when you're selling to in-store and lots of anonymous? I'm not saying the problem doesn't exist.
But I'm not talking about, oh my God, I feel like we need a whole nother podcast just so you and I can get this out of our system.
We've gone down this path before and it hasn't worked, so now Ben's just going to make some popcorn and be like, what
I know. I feel really bad for Ben. I don't think I understand. I still don't entirely understand the problem. Like, I get that, yes, it's not mapping one-to-one with users, but the problem we're trying to solve is that everyone's using the same definition, counting the same way, so that reporting is consistent. I was responding to the finite set of metrics that we need to kind of lock in on a limited number of, and looking at many, or I do think it's easy if you're a pure play e-commerce. Guess what? You care revenue, profit. I mean, there are 3 or 4. Like, there's corp. If you're a subscription company, yeah, you're looking at active users, new subscriptions, whatever. There are, I think, many industries where marketing is and digital and the data they're collecting is definitionally, there's a big gap in what you can see. So you wind up going to these, what you hope are leading indicator metrics. You hope that you can do modeling to get to them. You hope you can figure out the connections between what you're doing with TV, linear or connected, or
paid social or whatever, but it's a lot harder to get to the narrow set of metrics that you care about, I think.
Okay, I feel like we're not in disagreement anymore. But so now I'm going to turn it back to our actual guest. Ben, one of the things I keep thinking about, like I wanted to ask this basically since we first jumped on the show together. I have been through so many migrations of like data viz tools, warehouses, like you name it. I've had to navigate the team through one of those. And one of the things that I'm sitting here thinking about is like, cool. So I'm going to tell my business that we're going to spend 3 months building a metrics layer. What do you think? And all I can imagine is like eyes glazed over. Like, I mean, I somehow got people really excited about a data warehouse migration, I think because we were moving to Snowflake. But I just feel like getting the buy-in for this would be really tough for lots. And I know lots of data projects fall into this category, right? But have you seen companies that are doing it well or have like done a good job at getting that buy-in and getting the business to understand why it's important?
No.
Oh, okay.
So half. So there are a handful of companies that I know that have done this with metrics tools. Now, granted, metrics layer tools have been around for, 6 months. DBTs is not out yet. Transforms is the only one that's actually on the market. They had a few beta customers. The beta customers liked it. How beta customers go is you basically sit next to them and you implement it with them. And so, yeah, I guess that works. I think that people did it with Looker, and Looker is kind of the same thing. So, you can get people to do Looker. You can probably get people to do this. I think, to your broader point, though, of say that you have it, say you're using Looker, say you're using Tableau, and you've got DBT and Tableau and Looker, and you're like, we need to move all this stuff from Looker into metrics layer tool. What? Yeah, it's probably a hard thing to do. And I think this is one of the reasons that one of the hardest things that Looker always had to do. My understanding from what we hear about him is exactly this. It's there was the same thing at Looker, and they invested a ton in customer support and success and enablement to help people write the LookML because it was an expensive upfront thing to do. Metrics layer tools probably have the same fight, and there is a backdoor-ish way to me to make it where it kind of can be like the DBT thing where it just sort of slips underneath what already exists and doesn't have to be disruptive. The way that DBT is doing this, for instance, you can create metrics that are entirely additive. You can continue to use DBT exactly as it is, and then these metrics can just be things that are now accessible sort of going forward, and you can kind of migrate stuff to them if you want to and all that. Okay, that might work. My suspicion is it's something that's a longer time than that to get to where we, if this becomes a standard, it will take some time for people to bake that in. It'll take some time for people to migrate. It's not something where it's oh, of course, that's easy. Of course, we just layer this on. I am somewhat of an observability skeptic, but if that is a thing that everybody wants, that doesn't require you to migrate anything. It's just tack on another tool and presumably push some buttons and you get all your things. This is very much not that. And so, yeah, you're right. There is a migration problem. I don't know if anybody's figured out how to solve that yet, other than sort of the promise of the value and hope that it's not too much of a pain. And then if the sort of market proves that it's worth it, then we'll probably all do it.
But I think there is a window of opportunity because a lot of companies are going into version 2 of whatever this stack was, and they're noticing that they've got a ton of stuff that doesn't map to anything. Nobody knows what it is, and nobody can do anything with. And so they're having to encounter sort of the cleanup of all this sort of data debt or tech debt, if you will. And I think that's the insertion point for tools like this potentially is sort of okay, as you move forward from here and reassert a new structure and better governance, let's put this tool in as we redo this so that we've got clean all the way up. And I think you have a much more receptive audience at that point because of the amount of work to go back through everything and delete all the junk is significant. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. And I don't think it's understood very well by most businesses today because they're sort of like, well, I need these looker reports. And at the business level, they have no idea the man hours are going to be required in engineering work and analytics engineering work, Tim.
Yeah, we didn't tell them. We didn't tell them about how long. We didn't even tell them about LookML or that we had to do that piece of work.
But I think, Mo, you kind of have to tell them. You have to tell them a little bit. Only because it's going to require significant investment, right? That's the only reason why, is you just don't want people coming after you for stuff on the wrong timelines.
I think they got that. But Ben, one of the things I also want to understand is, like, as we keep talking about the metrics layer, we keep talking about tools. And I mean, I harp on about this all the time, but I don't know where the industry is at the moment with buy versus build in-house. Like, do you think this is something that people, like companies, can build in-house, or do you really think that you need a tool to solve this?
I think it's pretty tough to build. Like, yeah, I think it'd be pretty tough because it is, I think, to me, it is akin to building a visualization tool. So Mode's a visualization. Mode has like a fair bit of visualization tech in it. If you're thinking about building a visualization tool, my God, do not do it. That it is the sort of thing that, like, there's this famous bit about when people started Dropbox, like somebody on Hacker News or something was like, isn't it just an SFTP server with this thing? I could build this in a weekend. And like, maybe you could. Visualization tools are very much that. And I think the metrics thing is very much that, where it's like, oh, how hard can it be to be like, I choose a dimension, I choose a couple of dimensions, like I choose a metric, I choose a couple of dimensions. It's just a simple formula. Just put like select dimension, computed formula from table, spit out a metric. Yeah, it is. Like, that's all it is for a day. And then you're like, oh, but what do we add these other like derived metrics? What if we want to add stuff where we're starting to add more complicated filters? What if we have something that has any sort of joins to it? Like, you immediately tumble down this very, very deep rabbit hole that is basically the entire tech that made Looker worth $2.5 billion. I think the same is true for visualizations. And that one I know from experience, where it's like, oh, isn't it just choose an x-axis and a y-axis and draw it on a chart? And there's a bunch of charting software out there. It's like, yeah. But now people want to be able to change this, and they want to change that, and they want to aggregate it in different ways. They want to have tooltips that show one thing, and they want to show, like, don't show me the percent differences of these bars, show them compared to these other bars. Like, the amount of computation that requires to go into it is endless, and it's not really an 80-20 thing. It's not really something where, like, everybody wants to do this other thing, and there's this long tail of weird stuff that most people don't care about. It's like, it's a much more gradual curve than that, where you're never really off the steep part of the slope onto the long tail. You're just kind of gradually descending into things that you got to keep building. And so I think that's what this will become, is people will be like, oh yeah, I can build that. And then you'll build it in a weekend and it'll be okay. And then a month later, you're like, oh my God, I have an endless roadmap of things to create. So, you know, there is one other sort of point I would make about the difficulty of adopting this too. And this is a challenge for, I think, the transforms of the world, perhaps less so for DBTs, is the tool itself doesn't have any immediate value. So, like, if you have a metrics layer tool, you can't sell it alone. You got to sell it with something else. And so DBT has the advantage of they already have it's already packaged with something else that people are using, so they don't actually have to convince people to buy like a front end to it. But if you are just building, say you're building Malloy, which is this like Looker standalone thing, you got to build a client for it or something. You got to be able to show people, like, once you do this, what do you get? And the first thing people are going to be like, was, can I just have like a simple dashboarding tool that lets me do it? And all of a sudden now you're just a BI tool. And so, and that's kind of apparently where Looker actually came from, is the founders built LookML, and then they built the BI tool sort of out of customer need because they had to show why LookML existed. Yeah.
Mind blown.
So that was a while ago. So there may be, like, it doesn't mean that would happen again, but certainly, like, it's difficult to build like a piece of middleware that you have to build you have to have something before, you have to have something after it for it to be at all useful.
Okay, everybody, it's time for the Conductrix quiz, the quizzical query that is a conundrum for my two co-hosts as they go toe-to-toe on behalf of our listeners. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Conductrix. You know, the Analytics Power Hour and the Conductrix quiz are sponsored by Conductrix. They build industry-leading experimentation software for A/B testing, adaptive optimization, and predictive targeting. To find out how Conductrix could help you in those areas of your business, go to conductrix.com. All right, let's get the quiz started. Tim, you ready to know who you are competing on behalf of?
Tell me. Who?
Okay, and I want to try to pronounce her name correctly. I believe her name is Xu Yen Shen. And Mo, you are competing for a listener named Michael. So that one is easy. Michael Korotkov. Xu Yen Shen Xing and Michael Korotkov. All right, let's get into the quiz. All right, Mo and Tim seem to be waiting like ages for Michael to finally join the podcast recording session. When he finally does log in, he apologizes. Oh, I'm so sorry for being late again, but I was waiting forever for a SQL query to finish so I could get some analysis out to a client. They have a massive database I have to hit each time I run this report. Mo, slightly irritated, replies, "This seems to happen a lot. Have you thought about spending some upfront time to set up an OLAP cube or some other denormalized data structure so your analytics queries can run faster?" Speaking of OLAP, Tim chimed, "Did you know our old friend Edgar Codd coined the term for OLAP, online analytical processing? He's the relational database guy, right?" I replied, somewhat surprised and exceptionally pleased with myself for making the connection. Not sure why I'm reading all this editorial. "That's right," replied Tim. "The one who came up with the very first database query language, Alpha," which you might remember from another conductor's quiz long ago, and also showed what the relational calculus is equivalent in expressivity to the relational algebra, which SQL is based from. And, added Mo, he came up with the 12 rules for relational databases. And this is now our question. Which one of the following is not one of Codd's 12 rules? Is it A, comprehensive data sublanguage rule, B, guaranteed access rule, C, the information rule, D, systematic treatment of null values, or E, third normal form rule?
Well, that's not the direction I thought that was going to go in.
This is for SQL? This is 12 rules for SQL?
12 rules for relational databases.
Oh, for relations. Oh, okay.
And I know this will be particularly difficult for you, Tim, because I'm sure you're now only working in sort of, star cluster. What's the new latest database structure?
Data mesh.
Data mesh. There you go. No, anyways. Yeah. So those are our options. What thinkest you?
I'm going to take a stab and try and rule out C.
Rule out C, the information rule. So, when we're asking which one is not one of Codd's rules, you are correct. That is one of the 12 rules, the information rule. So, C is out of there. So, we have A, B, D, and E.
So I have. If I was going to guess which one it was, I think I know what I would guess, but I want to go for the elimination instead because that's better odds. So I am going to say A is not one of the 12 rules.
No, you're supposed to be guessing which of the following is not one of the 12 rules.
That's what he said.
Then,
right. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm saying A is one of the. I think A is one of the 12 rules.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it's good.
Right.
Double. Yeah. I think A is one of the 12 rules. I want to eliminate A.
Yeah, that would change your...
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm glad we clarified that because A is one of the 12 rules, and as you spoke it, you would have been eliminated at that point, but, trying to help you out.
Thanks for the leniency on the interpretation.
So comprehensive data sublanguage... I knew what you meant. Anyways, all right, so that means we have B, guaranteed access rule, D, systematic treatment of null values, and E, third normal form rule.
I'm going to try and eliminate B.
B, guaranteed access rule. You are correct. That is one of the 12 rules. You two know a lot about these 12 rules.
So
nicely
well, let's
done.
see if I can screw it up now. I think the one that is not is the E, the third normal form rule, because you can have first or second or third normal form. So I think E is not one of the 12 rules.
So you're saying that is the answer?
So I am selecting E as the answer.
Okay. That is correct. Third normal form rule is not one of Codd's 12 rules. While the degree or form of normalization is an important design component for a database, the normalization form was not one of Codd's 12 rules, which actually is more like 13 rules. All right. So I guess, Tim, that makes you the winner. So Shuyan Shin, you are a winner.
Woohoo!
So congratulations. And you'll probably be receiving a little surprise from our sponsors, Conductrix, who are the sponsors of the Conductrix quiz here on the Analytics Power Hour. All right. Let's get back to the show.
But if you look at organizations that are basically have acknowledged that they have an enormous amount of tech debt they've got Teradata and Azure and Google Cloud Platform and stuff duct taped together and baling wire, and they're going through a big reset. Is there, knowing that the metrics layer tools are in their nascency, but is your sense that there would be the potential to say we can do this kind of gradually, that as we get metrics from being in a hodgepodge of competing definitions, we're now going to move this metric into the metrics layer paradigm, and it's now going to be a golden metric. And maybe it's not one at a time, maybe it's 5 at a time, or where it could be a gradual rollout, or would it be like, no, probably to do a metrics layer, you're probably going to have to do some degree of a monolithic cutover to where you're getting the bulk of this. I guess maybe it's an agile versus waterfall question, is to get to the adoption.
I don't know. I would guess that you could actually do it kind of piecemeal. Mo probably has a better answer to this than I do, because it sounds like, Mo, you've got some more experience with things that are pretty related to this. I think you can't do that with like a BI tool. You can't do that where you're like, go to this, log into Looker.com for these metrics and log into, Tableau for these metrics. And like, we've got a giant directory of which tool has which numbers. Like that doesn't work.
But if you're swapping out your BI tool and saying to get this metric, use the metrics layer now instead of using.
So it shouldn't be. No, it depends. How all this shakes out, who knows? But okay. Take Mode, for instance. So if you're using Mode for like dashboards and stuff, you could create some of those dashboards on top of a metrics layer and some of those dashboards on top of just regular tables. And to the user, it's possible that's all transparent. Like, they may not even know. Like, if you're just looking at a dashboard, you don't need to know sort of what's under. In the same way, you don't know if a DBT table is underneath it or not. Like, you may assume that it is, but it could also just be like a bunch of raw stuff. You don't have to replace everything at once. Like, you can just sort of replace the things as they need it. So I think the same could happen here. It depends, again, on how it actually gets implemented. Like, if you're using Transform, for instance, and Transform's a little bit more of a metrics directory type of thing, then you're in the place where it's like, oh, some metrics live here, so look there first. But if they're not there, go here. Like, that feels harder to roll out, not all at once.
We actually did just roll out a new tool that does something like this. I'm not going to lie, I've opened it like 3 times, so I haven't looked at it in great depth, but it's called Caster. And the really nice thing about it is it tells us like what every table, like let's say, so I type marketing like 1,000 times a day. If I want to look at anything that has marketing in the title, it tells me not only like what tables in the data warehouse have that word in it, but also it connects to Looker and tells us what dashboards do, like what uses those tables, which is kind of nice. But that's also, I guess, a symptom of us having 50,000 million tables and no one knowing where stuff is.
Yeah, and there are certainly things like that too that are there's the all in the broad definition of observability, discoverability. It's the Atlans, the Casters, the Stimmas, Elations, Calibra, that whole collection of things. Yeah.
The list is getting bigger by the day.
Yeah, there's tons of these things that do this kind of like tracking of, okay, these are the assets that use these things, that kind of stuff. So,
speaking of tracking things, we're headed out of time, but this has been excellent. For a brief moment there, I felt like I was part of the new data movement going on, and that's new for me because I feel very much on the outside of this world. But no, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing that. It's really a pleasure having you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, one thing we do is we like to go around the horn and share something that we think is interesting called the last call. And so let's wind up our last calls right now. Ben, you're our guest. Do you have a last call you'd like to share?
I have 2 things. One, I'll plug I'll plug 3 things. I'll plug one that I'll do the shameless plug for the stuff, the various posts we've been talking about. So I write stuff. It's on a Substack because it's 2022. So it's benn.substack.com. It's Ben with 2 N's. I will plug someone else's Substack. So there's a bunch of data people out there having various conversations. One of the ones that I think is very good that is sort of undershared is called Compiler Queen. So it is it's from Ashley Sherwood. She's an analytics engineer, I believe, at HubSpot. But it's good. It's good stuff. Would recommend checking that out. The other thing I'll plug, which is just an article from like 5 years ago that I found that I send to people all the time and any opportunity I can. It's an article on Vulture, and it's called, what is the name of this? Why do corporations speak the way they do? And it's essentially about like phrases like, synergy and who's going to run point on this and all this kind of stuff. That's like these very kind of difficult to parse phrases.
Is that in the metrics layer?
No. But
like Canva's word is always context. It's like, I'm just going to share some context with you. Oh, let me get some context on this. Like context is our...
Let's put a pin in that, Mo, and we'll circle back. Sounds like
exactly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But there is like a sort of data point in this, which is the point of the article is basically like we use this kind of language to kind of like hide what we don't know. That like simple language means you can't hide, and like complex language sort of gives you the impression that you know what you're talking about. Data people have a tendency to do this a lot, where it sort of like overcomplicates stuff with here's a bunch of chart, like throw a bunch of numbers and charts and stuff at people to the point
blind them with science.
Yeah, where it's like I'm overwhelmed by this and I can't possibly understand what this means. And I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's trying to hide, but I think there's the same thing applies where it's just like simple stories are better, simple charts are better, tell people clear stories, use small words. I don't know. I'm too long-winded when I talk on the internet, so I probably should follow that advice, but...
I love this article, though. I actually can't wait to share this with the team. I feel like we're going to get some good laughs about it. Because we always, we're like, oh, we're going to take things async. So we're going to talk about it over Slack and get off soon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Mo, in that light, what's your last call?
So I watched a really cool video the other day by is it Vox Media or just Vox? Vox
sure.
Media. Anyway,
yeah.
One of
those.
those.
Vox Media Group, yeah.
It's called How American Conservatives Turned Against the Vaccine. And I don't know, I just really loved the reporter, the way she used data visualizations through that video just like blew my mind. And it's one of the times, I don't know, like she starts using like clear slides and she writes on them. And like, I just watched it in complete awe of the way she was able to communicate the story and really get people to absorb data without even necessarily feeling like you are. Like it just, I don't know, I thought it was beautiful.
And it completely turned the tide about vaccine hesitancy in the U.S. It's amazing.
We're crushing it over
It's a real uplifting topic.
All right, Tim. I'm sure you can do better with your last call, sir.
Oh, dear. Well, since we're talking about the modern data stack a little bit, or a piece of it, Ibrahim El-Awadi he's from Greenpeace, and he's kind of hitting the road with a talk about the modern data stack. So we saw him at Super Week. I did not see him, but I believe he presented very similar information at MeasureCamp North America. And he will be at Marketing Analytics Summit in June in Vegas talking about it, which, as it so happens, so will we. So if you would like to see the first opportunity for Mo to take out her pent-up aggression towards me in person, this will be the first time we've seen each other since Super Week 2020.
Yes.
But we will be, the whole podcast crew, minus Josh, alas, will be at the Marketing Analytics Summit in Vegas, June 20th through 23rd. We do have a discount code if you're interested and ready to get back out in person. So hit us up. But also, there is a Modern Data Stack session at that very in-person conference. And I have like 4 other last calls, but I'll leave it at that. What about you, Michael?
All right. That's probably what you've been wondering is what my last call is. So I recently ran across something on Twitter, and then as I dug a little deeper, I was just super fascinated by it. And I actually already posted this on the Measure Slack, but a guy by the name of Danny Richmond took GPT-3 and made it into a regex converter. So you write plain English, and GPT-3 changes it into real regex. And I was just like, that's really cool, because we've all been there having to write some regex, and this is a little tool he built that basically allows you to write what you want the regex to come out as, and it'll just pump out the regex code for you. But
did you see the follow-on that Smith Johansson wrote a GPT-3 thing to come back and would auto-generate critiques of what choices were made for the regex?
Yeah, there you go.
No, that's totally fictitious, but
it's part of the whole process. Anyways, I don't know if you find yourself having to write regex too often anymore, but it always pops back up every once in a while. So good to have some tools. All right. Those are some great last calls. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sure as you've been listening, you've been thinking to yourself, I would like to know more about this topic, or I have comments I'd like to share. We would love to hear from you. The best way to do that is through the Measure Slack group, or through Twitter, or you can also send us an email at contact@analyticshour.io. And if you haven't already, or whatever platform you listen to the show on, we'd love to get you to give us a rating and a review, because we love to see how we are helping or what other things we should be covering on the podcast. As always, no show would be complete without a huge and hearty thank you to our producer, Josh Crowhurst. Thank you, Josh. You help us out immensely, and we appreciate it. So there we go. That's the show. Ben, once again, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. This was fun.
It's very cool, very awesome and current topic. And I know I speak for my two co-hosts, Mo and Tim, when I say no matter what metrics layer you use today or tomorrow, remember, keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening. Let's keep the conversation going with your comments, suggestions, and questions on Twitter at @AnalyticsHour, on the web at analyticshour.io, our LinkedIn group, and the Measure Chat Slack group. Music for the podcast by Josh Crowhurst.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
Analytics. Oh my God. What the fuck does that even mean?
Positivity, energy. It's for myself, not for anyone else. All right, here we go. In 5, 4. There's a bunch of stuff that happens on the podcast that has become ingrained in its lifetime, and so there's markers that things the rituals must be observed.
Y'all done 200 episodes of this?
190.
Yeah, we'll do 200 sometime middle of this year. Yeah, we started the podcast in 2015. Is that right, Tim?
16, 15.
15, 16, somewhere. Yeah, I'm one of those numbers. Pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So.
Different time. It was somewhere between 2 and 50 years ago.
Yeah, and we've moved on from immediate family to extended family.
That's right. Listener base. That's right. Our listener base is.
Rock flag and one metrics layer to rule them all.